What if I told you that hidden within the most magnificent structures ever built by human hands lies a secret language, a mathematical code so powerful that those who possessed it believed it could unlock the very architecture of creation itself? For millennia, these patterns were more than mere decoration. They were a sacred script, jealously guarded by initiates who believed they had discovered nothing less than the divine blueprint of reality. Welcome to the hidden world of sacred geometry, where mathematics becomes mysticism, where science meets spirituality, and where the boundaries between the known and unknown dissolve into perfect symmetry. The question before us is not simply what sacred geometry is, but why was it concealed? What power did these ancient patterns hold that made their guardians so protective? And what happens when we finally decode their secrets? To answer these questions, we must embark on a journey across time and across civilizations. We will explore forbidden knowledge, secretive brotherhoods, and the remarkable persistence of geometric patterns that seem to whisper to us from the distant past. Our story begins in ancient Greece, where mathematics was not merely a practical tool, but a sacred path to understanding reality itself. In the 6th century before Common Era, on the island of Samos, a philosopher named Pythagoras founded a school unlike any other. His followers, known as the Pythagoreans, were not merely students but initiates into a mystery school that combined mathematics, music, and mysticism. While today we remember Pythagoras primarily for his theorem about right triangles, his mathematical investigations went far deeper. The Pythagoreans discovered that certain geometric ratios were found throughout nature, and that musical harmonies could be expressed as simple numerical relationships. For the Pythagoreans, this was no coincidence. These patterns revealed a profound truth, that beneath the chaotic surface of our world lies a hidden mathematical order. All is number, they declared, believing they had glimpsed the very language in which the universe was written. But here is where our mystery deepens. The Pythagoreans operated as a secret society, taking oaths never to reveal their mathematical discoveries to outsiders. Members who broke this vow of silence faced severe punishment, even death. The discovery of irrational numbers, quantities that cannot be expressed as fractions, shattered the Pythagorean belief that all phenomena could be described by whole number ratios. It was a mathematical heresy, a crack in their perfect worldview, and it needed to be contained. But perhaps their most closely guarded secret was what we now call the golden ratio, a proportion found throughout nature that the Greeks believed represented perfect harmony and beauty. They encoded this ratio in their architecture and art, visible to all yet comprehensible only to the initiated. This marks the first pattern in our investigation. Sacred geometry was kept secret not simply to maintain power, but because its practitioners believed some knowledge was too profound, perhaps even too dangerous for the uninitiated mind. Long before Pythagoras, however, another civilization had already incorporated sophisticated geometric principles into monumental structures that continue to baffle us today. Ancient Egypt. Here, mathematics was not just theoretical, it was literally set in stone. The Great Pyramid of Giza incorporates multiple geometric principles with astonishing precision. Its proportions encode the mathematical constant pi, its orientation aligns perfectly with the cardinal directions, and its dimensions relate to astronomical measurements with uncanny accuracy. But unlike modern engineers who might publish their methods, the Egyptian priesthood kept their geometric knowledge tightly controlled. Mathematical expertise was reserved for the scribal class and the temple priests, creating a knowledge monopoly that helped maintain their position in society. In Egyptian cosmology, maintaining cosmic order, what they called Mat, was essential for life to flourish. Their sacred geometry was not just about building impressive structures, it was about creating earthly reflections of celestial harmony. By controlling access to this knowledge, the priesthood positioned themselves as essential guardians of this cosmic balance. Even their religious symbols contained hidden mathematical codes. The Eye of Horus, for instance, can be broken down into a series of fractions that add up to nearly 1. These were not merely decorative elements, but encoded knowledge, hiding mathematical insights in plain sight. This pattern of geometric knowledge flowing through secretive channels would continue throughout history. Indeed, Pythagoras himself is said to have studied with Egyptian priests, returning to Greece with closely guarded wisdom that would form the foundation of his mysterious brotherhood. But why? Why were these mathematical insights, which today might be published in open academic journals, treated with such reverence and secrecy in the ancient world? The answer lies in understanding that for ancient peoples, discovering mathematical patterns in nature was not just science, it was revelation. These were not merely useful formulas, they were glimpses into the mind of creation itself. And like all powerful knowledge, they believed it must be approached with proper preparation and moral understanding. As ancient civilizations fell and the classical world gave way to the Middle Ages, one might expect that sacred geometric knowledge would have been lost. Instead, it went underground, preserved by secretive guilds and religious orders who continued to believe in its sacred power. Nowhere is this more evident than in Europe's magnificent Gothic cathedrals. These were not just impressive buildings, they were geometric symphonies in stone, embodying mathematical principles that connected earth to heaven. Take the Chartres Cathedral in France. Its proportions are based on sacred geometric principles that would have been familiar to the ancient Pythagoreans: the golden ratio, the vesica piscis, and harmonic proportions derived from musical theory. Even more remarkably, these buildings were constructed without modern mathematics as we know it. These master builders belonged to guilds that operated with systems of initiation, oaths of secrecy, and carefully controlled apprenticeships. Knowledge was passed from master to apprentice through direct instruction and guarded manuscripts that were never intended for public view. The masons who built these cathedrals were not merely tradesmen, they were keepers of a tradition that stretched back to antiquity, and they encoded their knowledge in the very stones they set, creating buildings that were not just places of worship, but repositories of geometric wisdom. Even today, we can see their secret signatures, the masons' marks left on stones throughout these structures. These were not just identifying tags, they were symbols of membership in a brotherhood that preserved and protected sacred knowledge across generations. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, another geometric tradition was flourishing, one that would transform abstract mathematics into some of the most beautiful patterns ever created. Islamic geometric art represents one of the most sophisticated applications of sacred geometry in history. Because Islamic tradition discouraged representational art in religious contexts, Muslim artists developed extraordinarily complex geometric patterns to express divine infinity and unity. What is remarkable is that these intricate designs begin with very simple operations: drawing circles, dividing them into equal parts, and connecting points with straight lines. Yet from these elementary steps emerge patterns of breathtaking complexity. Like their counterparts in Europe, these geometric artists operated in guild systems where knowledge was carefully preserved and transmitted. Their design methods were not widely published but passed through direct teaching relationships. As the medieval period progressed, these two traditions, Western and Islamic, began to cross-pollinate, with mathematical knowledge flowing across cultural boundaries despite religious differences. Yet the secretive nature of geometric wisdom remained constant. But perhaps the most intriguing guardians of sacred geometry during this period were the monastic orders. 40. Within monastery walls, ancient mathematical texts were preserved, copied, and studied, though often with an emphasis on their spiritual rather than purely scientific significance. Monasteries became repositories of classical knowledge, including the geometric works of Euclid and other ancient mathematicians. But access to these texts was tightly controlled, and the spiritual dimensions of geometry were emphasized over practical applications. In the medieval educational system, geometry was considered one of the 7 liberal arts, alongside arithmetic, astronomy, and music, all subjects that dealt with universal patterns, proportions. But while arithmetic might be taught more widely, advanced geometry often remained the province of specialized scholars. By the late Middle Ages, yet another layer of secrecy had developed around geometric knowledge with the emergence of esoteric societies and hermetic traditions. Alchemists, often portrayed simply as failed proto-chemists trying to turn lead into gold, were actually engaged in a comprehensive spiritual and philosophical tradition. For them, geometric forms represented states of matter and consciousness, and their manuscripts are filled with geometric symbolism, encoding multiple layers of meaning. These practitioners deliberately obscured their knowledge in complex symbolism and allegory, believing that wisdom should reveal itself only to the dedicated seeker. Their geometric systems were embedded within elaborate symbolic frameworks, decipherable only by those who had undergone proper initiation. As Europe moved toward the Renaissance, these underground currents of geometric knowledge began to resurface. But the tradition of secrecy would continue in new forms. The Renaissance represented a dramatic reawakening of interest in classical knowledge, including sacred geometry. Artists and thinkers dove eagerly into ancient texts, rediscovering principles that had been preserved through the Middle Ages by secretive traditions. When we look at Leonardo da Vinci's famous Vitruvian Man, showing human proportions inscribed within a circle and square, we are seeing not just an anatomical study, but the continuation of sacred geometric tradition that stretched back to antiquity. Renaissance artists did not just use geometry for accurate perspective. They embedded sacred proportions and harmonic ratios throughout their works, creating multi-layered compositions that spoke simultaneously to the educated elite and the general public. Even as geometric knowledge became more accessible during this period, there remained an esoteric dimension to its application. The most profound aspects of sacred geometry continued to circulate primarily among intellectual elites and initiatory societies. It was during this period that organizations like the Freemasons began to formalize, evolving from actual stonemason guilds into philosophical societies that preserved geometric symbolism as spiritual metaphor. The Masonic square and compass, perhaps the most recognizable symbol of Freemasonry, directly references the tools of geometric construction. For Masons, these were not just practical implements, but symbols of moral and spiritual development. The compass, which draws perfect circles, represented the spiritual realm, while the square, which measures right angles, symbolized ethical conduct in the material world. Masonic lodges continued the ancient tradition of graduated initiation, with geometric knowledge revealed progressively as members advanced through degrees. Their ceremonies took place on floors decorated with geometric patterns, and their rituals were filled with references to the divine architect of the universe. But as the Renaissance progressed into the scientific revolution, a tension developed between those who saw geometry as sacred knowledge and those who approached it as a practical tool, understanding and manipulating the physical world. Johannes Kepler perfectly embodied this tension. His groundbreaking work on planetary motion was driven by a mystical belief in geometric harmony, yet his methods were rigorously mathematical. He discovered that planets move in elliptical orbits, a geometric insight, but he interpreted this as evidence of divine design. In his book Mysterium Cosmographicum, Kepler proposed that the orbits of the 6 known planets could be understood as nested Platonic solids, the 5 perfect three-dimensional geometric forms. Though this model was ultimately incorrect, it shows how Renaissance scientists still viewed geometry as a key to cosmic secrets. Even Isaac Newton, often considered the father of modern physics, devoted as much time to alchemy and esoteric geometry as to his more famous scientific work. His private papers reveal a man obsessed with decoding geometric proportions in ancient temples, believing they contained encrypted knowledge from antiquity. Newton belongs to a long tradition of scientists who kept certain aspects of their work private, sharing them only with like-minded individuals. He published his physics and mathematics, but kept his alchemical and geometric speculations largely secret. The invention of the printing press created new dynamics in the tension between secrecy and disclosure. Geometric knowledge that had once been transmitted primarily through direct teaching relationships could now be widely disseminated through books. Yet even as basic geometric principles became more accessible, the spiritual dimensions of sacred geometry continue to be treated as privileged knowledge, circulated primarily through private networks and specialized publications. As the Enlightenment dawned across Europe, sacred geometry faced perhaps its greatest challenge. In an age increasingly devoted to rationalism and empirical science, would these ancient traditions of geometric mysticism finally fade away? On the surface, mathematics was becoming more specialized and secular. Geometry was increasingly taught as a purely practical discipline, stripped of its mystical associations. The spiritual dimensions of mathematical forms were relegated to the sidelines of mainstream intellectual discourse. Yet beneath this secular veneer, the traditions of sacred geometry continued to flourish within various societies and brotherhoods. Freemasonry reached the height of its influence during this period, attracting leading intellectuals, artists, and political figures who preserved geometric symbolism as spiritual metaphor. Many of the Enlightenment's most celebrated figures, from Benjamin Franklin to Mozart to Goethe, were members of Masonic lodges where they encountered ancient geometric traditions presented as spiritual wisdom. Perhaps nowhere is this hidden influence more evident than in the design of Washington, a city whose layout was significantly influenced by Freemasons, including George Washington himself. The city's plan incorporates numerous geometric alignments and proportions that connect key governmental buildings. Some see in these patterns merely aesthetic choices, while others identify deliberate sacred geometry encoding cosmic principles into the very heart of American government. The truth likely incorporates elements of both perspectives. By the 19th century, new esoteric movements emerged that placed sacred geometry at the center of their worldview. Groups like the Theosophical Society sought to synthesize ancient wisdom traditions from around the world, including geometric knowledge from diverse cultures. These organizations published books and journals that made previously guarded knowledge more accessible, though often presented within specific interpretive frameworks that required significant study to fully comprehend. Figures like Rudolf Steiner, founder of anthroposophy, lectured extensively on the spiritual significance of geometric forms, creating educational systems and architectural styles based on sacred geometric principles. His Gothenburg building in Switzerland represents one of the most ambitious attempts to embody these principles in modern architecture. As we entered the 20th century, sacred geometry found itself at a crossroads. Scientific materialism had become the dominant paradigm, relegating geometric mysticism to the fringes of mainstream thought. Yet paradoxically, new scientific discoveries were revealing geometric patterns at the heart of nature that would have astonished even the ancient Pythagoreans. From the discovery of fractals to the helical structure of Den, to the geometric patterns of crystal formation, modern science was confirming what ancient traditions had long maintained. Geometric forms are fundamental to the structure of reality. Even in theoretical physics, the most advanced mathematical models of reality rely heavily on geometric concepts. String theory, for instance, proposes that the fundamental constituents of the universe are one-dimensional strings vibrating in multiple geometric dimensions. Today, interest in sacred geometry is experiencing a remarkable resurgence. No longer confined to secret societies, these ancient principles are being taught in public workshops, explored by artists and architects, and integrated into various spiritual practices. Artists are creating works that explore the same proportions and patterns that fascinated their ancient counterparts, often using advanced technology to generate forms of unprecedented complexity based on traditional principles. Architects are revisiting sacred geometric proportions, finding that buildings designed according to these ancient principles often create spaces that people experience as particularly harmonious and uplifting. And across various spiritual traditions, sacred geometry has emerged from the shadows, openly acknowledged as a powerful tool for contemplation and understanding cosmic patterns. Perhaps the most intriguing frontier in our exploration of sacred geometry lies not in ancient temples or esoteric manuscripts, but in the human brain itself. Recent neuroscience research suggests that our perception of geometric patterns may be hardwired into our neural architecture. When people view certain geometric forms, particularly those based on principles like the golden ratio, specific neural pathways activate in ways that differ from our response to random or chaotic patterns. Some researchers propose that these responses may help explain why certain geometric forms appear consistently across cultures and throughout history. Even more intriguing are studies of geometric hallucinations. Research has shown that across cultures and throughout history, people in altered states of consciousness, whether through meditation, sensory deprivation, or psychedelic substances, report seeing similar geometric patterns. These patterns, which neuroscientists call form constants, include lattices, spirals, tunnels, and cobwebs, geometric forms that correspond closely to patterns found in sacred art from diverse traditions. This suggests a provocative possibility that sacred geometry may represent an attempt to externalize and make sense of patterns that emerge from within our own consciousness. Could it be that the ancient practitioners of sacred geometry were documenting patterns they experienced in heightened states of awareness? That geometric knowledge was kept secret partly because it was associated with profound alterations in consciousness that were reserved for initiates. This connection between geometry and consciousness may help explain why geometric knowledge was often transmitted within initiatory contexts. Perhaps the full significance of these patterns could only be grasped through direct experience of the states of awareness they represented. Today, many contemplative traditions continue to use geometric forms as focus points for meditation, creating environments that facilitate shifts in consciousness. Meanwhile, at the frontiers of theoretical physics, geometric models are being used to describe the fundamental nature of reality in ways that sometimes parallel ancient cosmological systems. Quantum geometry, loop quantum gravity, and other cutting-edge theories propose that space itself may have a fundamental geometric structure at the smallest scales, a proposition that resonates with ancient claims that geometry underlies the fabric of reality. Perhaps most remarkably, we now understand that complex natural forms, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the branching pattern of trees to the structure of galaxies, can emerge from relatively simple geometric algorithms repeated over time. This principle of complexity emerging from simplicity through iteration offers a new perspective on ancient claims about sacred geometry. Perhaps what the ancients intuited and encoded in their sacred art and architecture was this fundamental principle of how complexity emerges in our universe. Today, these ancient principles find new applications in fields ranging from of visualization to artificial intelligence, where geometric representations help us make sense of complex information. We began by asking why sacred geometry was kept secret for centuries. Having journeyed across time and cultures, we can now discern several interwoven reasons that together form a complex tapestry of motivations. First, there was the belief that geometric knowledge represented a form of power, the power to understand and potentially manipulate the underlying patterns of reality. Like all powerful tools, this knowledge was restricted to those deemed morally and intellectually prepared to use it responsibly. Second, there were practical considerations. Geometric knowledge conferred professional advantages to groups like stonemasons and architects, creating economic incentives to maintain trade secrets within closed communities. Third, there was the religious dimension. Across cultures, geometric patterns were seen as bridges between the human and divine sacred languages that enabled communication with higher realities. The sacred nature of this knowledge demanded that it be protected from casual or profane use. Fourth, there was the pedagogical aspect. Complex geometric understanding was seen as something that required graduated instruction concepts, building upon concepts in a sequence that could not be rushed or bypassed. Secrecy ensured that practitioners absorbed the necessary foundations before encountering more advanced knowledge. And finally, there was the experiential dimension. Perhaps the deepest insights of sacred geometry were not intellectual propositions, but direct experiences of consciousness that could only be accessed through disciplined practice and preparation. Today, we find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. The mathematical knowledge once jealously guarded by mystery schools and secret societies is now freely available in textbooks and on the internet. Anyone with curiosity can access geometric principles that were once revealed only to initiates after years of preparation. But has this democratization of knowledge fulfilled the fears of those ancient guardians? Has sacred geometry lost its power through profane exposure? Or has something else occurred entirely? What we observe is something more nuanced. The technical aspects of sacred geometry, the mathematical formulas and construction methods are indeed widely accessible. But the experiential dimensions, the shifts in perception and consciousness that these patterns can facilitate, remain as personal and profound as ever. Perhaps what we are witnessing is not the end of sacred geometry's mystery, but its evolution. As these ancient patterns find new applications in fields from virtual reality to ecological design, they continue to serve as bridges between the measurable and the immeasurable, the visible and the invisible. What remains constant across millennia is the human recognition that geometric patterns speak to something fundamental about our universe and our place within it. Whether expressed through stone temples, illuminated manuscripts, or digital algorithms, these patterns continue to evoke a sense of order and meaning that transcends cultural boundaries. In the end, Perhaps sacred geometry was never truly hidden, only waiting to be recognized. The patterns have always been present in the spiral of galaxies, the branching of trees, the symmetry of flowers, and the very structure of our DNA. They are written into the fabric of reality itself. What was kept secret was not the patterns themselves, but methods for perceiving them and understanding their significance, ways of seeing that transform ordinary reality into a text written in language of form, proportion, and harmony. Today, as this knowledge circulates more freely than ever before, we have the opportunity to engage with it not as forbidden fruit, but as a shared human inheritance, a visual language that speaks to our deepest intuitions about the ordered beauty of the cosmos. The temples and cathedrals built according to sacred geometric principles have outlasted the civilizations that created them. They stand as monuments not just to mathematical precision, but to the human quest to understand our place in a universe of pattern and meaning. And as we create new structures, both physical and conceptual, based on these ancient principles, we continue a tradition that links us to our ancestors across vast stretches of time. We participate in a great conversation about the nature of reality that has unfolded across millennia. What was once hidden is now openly taught. What was once restricted to the few is now available to the many. Yet the mystery at the heart of sacred geometry remains not because it is kept secret, but because it points toward aspects of reality that exceed our ordinary understanding. As our exploration draws to a close, we are left with a profound question. Was sacred geometry kept secret primarily to maintain power and privilege, or was there something deeper at work? Were the guardians of these traditions protecting something precious from misuse and misunderstanding? Perhaps both perspectives contain elements of truth. Human institutions inevitably reflect human complexity, mixing noble aspirations with worldly concerns, spiritual insights with social hierarchies. What is undeniable is that these geometric traditions preserved insights about the structure of reality that continue to prove relevant in our scientific age. As physicist Richard Feynman once remarked, nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. In their insistence that mathematical patterns reveal deeper truths about reality, the ancient guardians of sacred geometry anticipated contemporary understandings of how fundamental laws generate the rich complexity of our world. As we look to the future, sacred geometry offers not just historical insight, but practical wisdom. In an age of environmental crisis, these traditions remind us that human design works best when it aligns with the geometric principles already operating in nature. From more efficient solar panels based on the Fibonacci sequence to buildings that mimic natural forms, sacred geometric principles are finding new applications in creating technologies, environments that work with nature rather than against it. And as we create new digital realms and virtual experiences, sacred geometry offers design principles that resonate with human perception, creating spaces that feel harmonious and coherent even when they exist only as digital constructs. On a personal level, engagement with these patterns continues to offer what it has always provided: a contemplative focus that can shift perception and expand awareness. As we trace these forms, whether physically or mentally, we participate in a practice that connects us to countless others across time and space. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from sacred geometry's emergence from secrecy is the recognition that these patterns belong to all of humanity. They transcend cultural, religious, and disciplinary boundaries, speaking to something universal about how we perceive and make sense of our world. In the innocent wonder of a child discovering that a compass can create a perfect circle, we glimpse the same fascination that has drawn humans to geometric exploration for thousands of years, recognition that in these simple forms lies a profound elegance that connects us to the underlying patterns of existence. As we continue to unravel the secrets of the universe, from the subatomic realm to the cosmic scale, we find geometric patterns woven throughout reality. What was hidden is now revealed, not just as mathematical curiosity, but as a key to understanding our place in a universe of breathtaking order and beauty. The mystery of sacred geometry was never truly in the patterns themselves, but in our human capacity to recognize, create, and find meaning in them, to see in these elegant forms a reflection of the ordered intelligence that permeates our universe. In that recognition, we participate in a tradition as ancient as humanity itself, and as contemporary as our newest discoveries about the nature of reality. What was once hidden has now been revealed. But the mystery remains not because it is kept secret, but because it points toward horizons of understanding that continue to expand as we explore them.